Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. So we are today going to discuss a very, very important part of Vedantic tradition, that is the Vedic heritage. I mean, the essence of Vedas. So you will find that among the popular scholars, they believe that there is one single sound or speech system which is considered to be the condensation of the entire Vedic wisdom. It is called Omkara or Pranava, Om, that which we will discuss later. I have already discussed this in my program, in my classes on Mandukya Karika, Mandukya Upanishad. Now, that we will discuss later. It's called the essence of Vedas. The essence of Vedas is actually silence, anubhuti or experience, the highest mystical experience, which cannot be expressed in words or in statements, because it's the intuitive experience of oneness of the entire existence. But there is one sound system which approximately expresses that. It is called Pranava or Omkara. Now, coming a few steps below, you will find there are 4 great statements in the entire Vedic literature. Vedic literature here means the Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka and Upanishads, portions of all the 4 Vedas, that is Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharvaveda. All these Vedic traditions have got Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka and Upanishadic traditions. Now, from all this, the entire Vedic corpus, Shankaracharya selected 10 Upanishads and wrote commentaries on these 10 Upanishads. They together represent the essence of the spiritual and philosophical essence or condensation of the entire Vedic literature. And whatever we found in the Bhagavad Gita is only an essence of the essence of it. Only small fragment, all put together in capsule form. Now, in the Vedic literature, as I mentioned, there are 10 famous Upanishads, and they became famous because in 8th century, Shankaracharya selected these 10 Upanishads and wrote very elaborate commentaries on this. Shukla Yajurveda. So there are two traditions in Yajurveda tradition, Shukla Yajurveda and Krishna Yajurveda. Shukla Yajurveda has got this Isavasya Upanishads. So Samaveda has got this Kenopanishad, Kathopanishad, Krishna Yajurveda, Prashnopanishad, Atharvaveda, Mundagopanishad, again Atharvaveda, Mandukya is also Atharvaveda, and then Taittiriya is in Krishna Yajurveda, Aitareya in Rigveda, Chandogya is Samaveda, and Brihadaranyaka in Shukla Yajurveda. So these are 10 Upanishads: Isha, Kena, Katha, Prashna, Munda, Mandukya, Taittiriya, Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka, Aitareya, Brihadaranyaka. The 10 Upanishads. Now, from these 4 Upanishads, 4 statements are selected. And they actually, together, they represent the very condensation of Advaitic wisdom. So, what are these 4 statements? Or why are they called for the great statements? Called Mahavakyas. Mahavakya, the great statements. As an introduction to this, a small, maybe a little brief description may be necessary. In Vedic literature, primarily, you find a number of statements that are divided into different categories. Some statements are directions or injunctions prompting you to perform certain rituals, and the purpose of performing these rituals is to get something that you already do not possess. So there are Vedic rituals which are supposed to be performed for obtaining wealth, health, long life. All these are the results or the products of these ritualistic performances or practices. So now, you don't already have it and you want to obtain it, and for that you perform a ritual. Example is the classical example, if you find in the Vedic literature, you find Surgakamo Yajeda. Now you want to go to heaven. It is a status, it is a position that you want to attain, which you already have not attained, and in order to achieve the result, you perform a ritual. Then, interestingly, there is another category of statements which are very, very important. You don't perform any ritual for that. You practice certain spiritual disciplines because you are not trying to obtain something that you have not already obtained. You are practicing these spiritual disciplines in order to remember that you already have obtained it, but you are under the notion that you have not obtained it. To give an example, in Advaita, in Advaitic tradition, you are already liberated. There is no bondage. So you find in the Mandukya Karika, Gaudapada Karika, na bandho, na chotpatti, no, there is no liberation. There is no spiritual discipline necessary, no moksha, there is no liberation because there is no bondage. What does it mean? You are already liberated. Then why do you discuss philosophy? Why do you practice spiritual disciplines? In order to remove the wrong notion that we have in our mind that we are not Brahman. When we define ourselves as just physical entities, it's not because we are in need of something, but rather we are not in need of obtaining something. We are in need of discovering it that we already have got. So the classical example will make it very clear. A person was looking for a necklace made of gold. He looked everywhere. He looked around his home, in the bushes, in the streets, and he inquired his neighbors, "Did you find my necklace?" And finally, somebody came, an enlightened person. He reminds him, actually, the necklace is already there. You are wearing it. Only you did not know that necklace is already with you. So, it's a classical example. So, you already have got this necklace hanging on your neck. It is called, it is actually called Siddhartha Bodha Vakyani. Siddhartha Bodha Vakyani means it gives you the awareness, bodha. When you hear this statement and when you meditate on the meaning of the statement, then the wrong notion that you are not Brahman, the wrong notion that you are just a physical entity, that wrong notion disappears. Just like clouds, patches of clouds disappear and the sun is self-revealed. The clouds do not reveal the sun. Rather, even the disappearance of the cloud doesn't reveal the sun. When the clouds disappear, the sun which is already there gets self-revealed. There is no effort here. When the clouds disappear, a sun that is already there, we become aware of the fact it is there. Like that, when a neighbor comes and tells you the necklace that you are searching for in the bush, in the courtyard and elsewhere, it is actually hanging on your own neck. You look at it, look at the mirror, oh, it is here. These 4 Mahavakyas function like that. The 4 Mahavakyas do not give you any new knowledge, because according to Vedanta, spiritual enlightenment is not a gift from anybody. We don't get it. We already have it, but the obstacles standing in the way of our understanding or awareness, these obstacles disappear, and then we identify ourselves with we actually are. This is the way these Mahavakyas function. And one important thing to remember is, in these Mahavakyas, we don't take the literary meaning of these Mahavakyas. It's called Vachyartha. What we take is the implied meaning called Lakshyartha. We will discuss this in course of time. Now, what are the Mahavakyas? There are 4 types of Mahavakyas. Rather, Mahavakyas are divided into 4 categories. One is the Mahavakya, the statement that instructs you. Upadesha Vakya. Tattvam Asi is Upadesha Vakya. And then there is Anubhuti Vakya. The result of this Upadesha, this instruction is Anubhuti. Just like somebody comes and tells you that the necklace that you're looking for is actually hanging on your own neck. So you look towards yourself, you suddenly find it there. So then you get Anubhuti. Oh, actually the necklace is not outside, it is with me. But in Vedanta or in spiritual life, it doesn't happen so quickly. So there is a period of inquiry, spiritual disciplines and so on. And there are 2 Mahavakyas which represent the particular intermediary stage. It is called Anusandhana Vakya and Manana Vakya. I will just give a brief description of this. The first Mahavakya that we normally study is Upadesha Mahavakya. Upadesha Mahavakya is called, it is called Tattvam Asi. That's Upadesha Mahavakya. Now, this Mahavakya actually appears in Chandogya Upanishad, which actually from Samaveda. And now, this Upadesha when you get, we made it Tat, Tum, Asi. These are three words here. They don't, actually, Asi represents the verb. Tat means that, Tum means you. These are 3 statements. Now you will be surprised, these statements, the elaborate Bhashyas, commentary, 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad. In the Chandogya Upanishad, in the 6th chapter, from 8th Brahmana up to 16th Brahmana, you find continuously the discussion continuing. Just one Upadesha instruction is given, and then 8 times these Upadesha, the instructions are repeated, and each time when the repetition takes place, it is supported by a fresh example that we will discuss in course of time. So the first Mahavakya normally, when you think of the spiritual evolution of a person, is called Tattwamasi, is from Chandogya Upanishad. Now, before these Mahavakyas are taken up, I want to mention a few more important things. It is more of a, this is related to the monastic tradition. We preserved this Vedic wisdom. You know, Shankaracharya founded 4 monasteries in 4 distant corners of India. In the east, in Puri, actually in Orissa, he established it's called the Govardhana Matham. It is called in Puri. And that particular monastery or that tradition, the monastic members or those who are affiliated to that tradition, is responsible for the preservation of Rigveda, and the Upanishad that represents Rigveda is Aitareya Upanishad, and it contains one Mahavakya, Prajnanam Brahma, which is actually a Mahavakya, which is used for contemplation and meditation. He called Laksha Mananavakya, called some Lakshanavakya, all these are means. Manana means contemplation. When you hear an instruction, Tattwamasi, nobody will understand the meaning actually. In fact, in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is an interesting episode. The father Uddalaka, he instructs his son, Svetaketu, Tattwamasi. Svetaketu thought the father was crazy because the meaning is the supreme spiritual truth you are inquiring into, that is you yourself. If somebody tells you that the Christ you are praying to is yourself, means you can imagine what will be the situation. But here the inquiry is not into a particular God idea, but rather the inquiry is directed in the direction of the supreme truth, that is the essence of the universe, that is the essence of creation, that is the source of everything. So that divine principle that you are inquiring into is within you, but not this physical body, but that divine principle that is the essence of your personality. So Svetaketu actually was confused, and he asked his father, Bhuya eva ma bhagavan vijñāpayatu. He means, oh father, please teach me again. So Uddalaka, Svetaketu's guru and father, repeats this in the next Brahmana, and this goes on 8 times. And each time the father brings up a new illustration. Vriksha Drishtanda, Nadi Drishtanda, means different examples, different illustrations from trees, rivers, different living creatures, all from nature, and meditate on this. So then Svetaketu did a lot of meditation into the meaning of the instruction that he received, and finally he realized through meditation, he realized the supreme truth. During this interval between instruction and experience, that is between Upadesha and Anubhuti, 2 processes happen. One is manana or contemplation, the other is internalization. It's called Nidhyasana Vakya. It is Ayamatma Brahma. The Ayamatma Brahma, it is from Mandukya Upanishad, it is from Atharva Veda, and that particular Mahavakya was preserved by another monastery that Shankaracharya founded. They are the custodians of Atharva Veda tradition. It is actually very close to Indo-Tibetan border. Almost, just called Joshi Mutt or Jyotir Mutt, very close to Bedri, not far from Indo-Tibetan border in the Uttarakhand. So that is another place where Shankaracharya founded a monastery. So you can imagine, he founded a monastery, put one of his disciples as the abbots, and asked him to take care of, to be the custodian of this Vedic tradition, and also asked him to be the custodian of this particular Mahavakya. So all the monks and others who are affiliated to that monastery, they consider this particular Mahavakya for their meditation. So, it is called Anusandhana Vakya, this Prajnanam Brahma, the Jyotirmarsha. Now, Tattvamasi is the Upadesha, which I mentioned earlier. Tattvamasi, it comes from, as I mentioned, Chandogya Upanishad. It is affiliated to the Dwaraka Math. Dwaraka is actually in the west coast of India, near on the border in the coastal region of Gujarat, Tattvamasi. And another disciple of Shankaracharya, Hastamalaka, he was made in charge of that monastery. And one particular Mahavakya was given to him, to that tradition, to that monastery to maintain as a tradition. It is Samaveda, and the Upadesha is that particular Mahavakya is Tattvamasi. It's a very interesting organizational structure, 4 monasteries in 4 distant corners of India, and 4 great monastic disciples who themselves became immortal by their spiritual greatness and also by the intellectual contribution to Advaita literature. And each of these monasteries were put in charge of one Vedic tradition, and also one of the Mahavakyas, one of the statements from that particular Upanishad which belongs to that particular Vedas. Remember, it doesn't mean that others should not study, but they were given the primary responsibility of preserving the intellectual and spiritual and monastic tradition belonging to that particular Vedic lineage. Then the last stage in the spiritual journey is Aham Brahmasmi, Anubhuti. That's what happened to Svetaketu in the Chandogya Upanishad. Suppose somebody gives you the Upadesha instruction, that supreme truth, Atma, Aidadatmi Vidam Sarvam, etc. Means Tattvamasi Svetaketu, Tat Tum Asi Svetaketu. Hey Svetaketu, Tat Tum Eva Asi. That Atma that you are searching for is you yourself. This is the instruction given. So you can find in the 8th Brahmana of the 6th chapter, Saya Esha Anima Aidudatmimidam Sarvam Tat Satyam Sa Atma Tattvamasi Svetaketu Idi Bhuya Eva Ma Bhagavan Vijñapayedu Idi Tatha Somya Idi Hovacha. So this comes in the 8th Brahmana of the 6th chapter. And then of course Svetaketu asked his father to repeat once more. That supreme truth, the subtle, supreme, hidden truth that you are trying to discover through meditation, that you are trying to realize in your own inner being, that is not somewhere else, that is you yourself. This instruction. And when this instruction is given, as I mentioned, Svetaketu was totally confused. Because he knew and he thought he was the son of Uddalaka, a young man who was well versed in Vedas, but still had not attained enlightenment. So, and he is told by his father that the Atman, the divine principle, the divine reality that we are trying to realize is I myself, but I cannot be. I am just a 25-year-old young man. I cannot be Atman or anything. So naturally, you need a lot of internalization, concentration, meditation and so on. And finally, you realize, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. So, that Aham Brahmasmi Mahavakya is from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is one of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, actually part of the Shukla Yajurveda, the second part of the Yajurvedic tradition. And this particular Yajurveda was given to Sringeri Math tradition in Karnataka to preserve it. And then Mahavakya is, again as I mentioned, it is Aham Brahmasmi, Anubhuti Vakya. So you can imagine 4 Vakyas, instruction and experience. In between, there is an intermediary stage. Prajnanam Brahma, Ayamatma Brahma. Mananavakyam, and that is, Manana means meditating on the meaning of what you hear, what you read. Because if the one important aspect of a great spiritual instruction is literally meaning, or what the meaning that you make out when you are hearing for the first time, it reveals only a very superficial outer shell of that statement. As you read more and more, and even as you meditate on the meaning of what you hear, what you read more and more, the statement itself begins to grow. It begins to reveal more and more meaning. Anyone can experience this when you read any statement from any famous spiritual classical literature, either in the parables of Christ, or maybe Dhammapada, or the Bhagavad Gita, or any great statement from any tradition, spiritual tradition. The statement grows in stature. Its meaning goes deeper. And when we sincerely read and try to internalize, this happens. Of course, the degree to which we are able to go deeper into the meaning depends upon our own sincerity. The purity of our own mind is a deciding factor. Any prayer, any meditation, any spiritual statement, when you think more and more, you find that more and more meaning comes out of it. It's not that it produces no new meaning. Rather, as we try to contemplate and meditate upon the meaning of the statement, our own mind becomes more and more pure. The karmic blocks get loosened, and our mind moves closer to the essence, the meaning of the statement. And when that happens, it becomes an experience. Aham Brahmasmi. So Tattwamasi to Aham Brahmasmi. A journey from instruction to experience. Here one may ask this question. So you read certain great spiritual personalities in history who didn't take a very long time for internalizing or experiencing or receiving the meaning or getting the experience of the instruction they received. For example, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, he immediately realized the meaning of it. That same story is told of Shankaracharya. There are great men, great women, great spiritual teachers who did not take very long to understand it. Remember, he said, journey from hearing to experience, from concept to, from idea to inner experience. There are two views among the traditional Advaitins with regard to this journey, the spiritual journey from hearing to experience, from instruction to experience, from concept to experience, real life experience or enlightenment. We know Buddha took a long time. As Buddha meditated, here all these previous life cycles, all these experiences, his own previous life cycles. Buddha went through so many life cycles. He was born not as saints in our life cycle. He was born certain animals. There are Jataka tales, rebirth stories of Buddha. When Buddha was born as a very enlightened monkey, as a very enlightened elephant, and multiple roles you can find in Buddha Jataka tales. So it's the journey from instruction to experience. So there are two views on this. One is called Sabda Aparokshvada, the other one is called Prasankhyanavada. It's a Sanskrit term used by Sanskrit writers, Advaitic philosophers. In Advaitic tradition, there are three schools which are responsible for upholding these diverse views. It's called technical Bhamadi school and Vivarana school. Vivarana school got the name Vivarana from a book written by Prakashatmedi, who wrote the Panchapadika Vivaranam. And Panchapadika Vivaranam is actually a commentary on Panchapadika, written by Padmapada. It's some kind of a commentary on some parts of the Brahma Sutras. So, according to that particular school of Vedantins, beginning with Padmapada, Prakashatmedi and others, Vivarana Prameya Sangraha and others, they think that if you are fully endowed with spiritual qualities called sadhana, chatushtaya sambatti, sravanam, mananam and nidhyasanam, 7 disciplines. Suppose you have already reached a total conclusion, in your own life, well, spiritual life is the only way of life. Everything else, not unreal, but secondary. So you can discard those things. Without this ability to discard the unreal, the irrelevant, you will never be able to live with peace in this world. If anyone thinks everything is equally important, then it's impossible. Everything can be done as a sacred duty, mentally offering the results to God in Karma Yoga. But it's all based on the inner conviction that there are certain important values which really matter in life. Other things are okay, but they are not supreme. They could be discarded, called anitya. Nitya, anitya, vastu viveka. This is the first discipline. Then, ihamutra phalabhoga viraga, the ability to discard the anitya, the irrelevant, the momentary, the impermanent, and uphold the relevant, the permanent. And then, the result of all these higher ideas, you become mentally more mature. It is called Samadhi Sarka Sampatti. So, internal and external, self-restraint, mind control, sensory, discipline, all this, concentration, sense of sanctity, all these qualities come. Technically called, Shama, Dhamma, Saddha, Didiksha, Uparadi, Samadhanam, like that, 6 disciplines. So, ability to endure difficulties, but you should respond to difficulties, but difficulties should not blow you away from your feet, from your focus. That's the idea behind. And a sense of self-control, controlling our emotions and feelings, a sense of sanctity, concentration, all this. And then a strong urge to attain, to realize a higher ideal. Mumukshutvam means a strong urge for spiritual liberation. And then naturally you'll be inclined to read and connect yourself with higher ideas from scriptures, Sravanam. Then you contemplate on that, you go deeper into it, and Mananam and Nidhyasanam, internalization. These 7 disciplines are important. If one is established in these 7 disciplines, then if you listen to instruction once, the result will immediately follow. So it's called Shabda Aparokshvada. Shabda means Sravanam. Sravanam doesn't necessarily mean hearing. When you get this instruction from a teacher, if your mind is ready, immediately you will be able to catch its experience dimension. This can happen, you can find any of you. Suppose some of you go to a bookstore, maybe for the first time, without any previous acquaintance with Vedanta or any spiritual scriptures. Go to a bookstore or library, and you find number of books are laid out there. In which direction your mind goes, that depends upon your own samskaras. And then you suddenly find a great spiritual work, something, and you read it. And immediately you feel a great feeling, you get a feeling at home when you start reading the book and you feel this is the thing that I wanted, this thing which I want to continue reading. Now, this may not happen to everyone. This may happen only to a few. We may interpret it as an accident, but accident itself may have a cause behind. That's because according to Vedantic tradition, that person may have already undergone some spiritual discipline, so that when he hears for the first time some higher idea, he immediately gets connected to it without any friction, without any disturbance. Purvabhyasena tainaiva hriyedevi avashopi saka jijnasurabiyogasya shabda brahmadivartada. You find in the 6th chapter. Purvabhyasa means previous experiences, previous practices. Our mind has accumulated lot of spiritual tendencies and also our own disciplines. So in previous life, one may have worked to attain the sadhana, sadhushta, sambhati, these great disciplines. In this life, may not have got a chance, but when you accidentally find a book, happen to listen to a scripture, immediately you feel a kind of a previous connection to it. Again, this may not have a transforming effect on the person, not at all, not necessarily. It may have only superficial impact on a person. Sometimes it can be a transformative effect also possible, very rare. But the point is, even to be interested, even to be impressed by a spiritual idea, by while reading or listening to, requires some previous connection, some previous samskaras. Now, this is called Shabda Virakshavada. This happens, the immediate transformation. You can find maybe some great spiritual teachers, they have undergone that. The other school seems to be much more relevant for modern times, called Prasankhyanavada. Prasankhyanam means Dhyanabhyasa, disciplines. One may read it, well, interest, then next day forgotten. Again, after some time, again may read, again you may feel, oh, it's wonderful. Again we go back to previous lifestyle. So, the first hearing may not produce the same deep impact or transformative impact on every listener. It doesn't happen. Sometimes it may require repeated hearing, and eventually you may feel more attracted towards a great spiritual idea. In traditional schools, they say when you listen to Tattvamasi Mahavakya, it may not produce immediate result for everyone. It could happen to some great souls, certainly, but it may happen only to a selected few. For many people, they need to listen again and again. They need to repeatedly hear, and then they will also direct their lifestyle accordingly. And slowly, they go deeper and deeper. That's why people who listen to Vedantic ideas are sometimes able to go deeper and connect with the more spiritual, universal, deeper implications of their own respective scriptural traditions. It is a common experience. People who listen to Vedanta, they don't undergo conversion. That's not the purpose of Vedanta. Vedanta wants to help every individual, no matter what religious tradition he is born into. Vedanta helps every spiritual seeker to go deeper into his own or her own tradition and connect with the deeper implications of their own spiritual heritage. That's the magic of Vedanta. And so you find that many people feel when they listen to Upanishads, when they listen to Vedantic ideas, they feel it is all about their own spiritual journey. It is not one religion coming in contact with another religion. It's actually, we are beginning our own spiritual journey. We deepen our own convictions, our own practices, and we suddenly begin discovering the jewels in our own lineage, heritage. That's the magic of Vedanta. So this is this is a short description of the parambara or tradition of the Mahavakyas. I mean, each of these Mahavakyas was preserved by one particular monastery or other. There are 4 monasteries founded by Shankaracharya, and each of the monasteries were made responsible for the preservation of one particular Vedas, and also one particular Mahavakya belonging to that Vedic tradition. But it doesn't mean that others should not read that Veda, not at all. It is not kind of exclusivism. It may be the conditions of 8th century required this kind of an arrangement. This is an important thing to remember. Now, the next important point is about the interpretation of these Mahavakyas. So, it has something to do with the theological or epistemological tradition of Vedanta. To give an example, let's say the first Mahavakya, Tat-tum Asi. Now, I mentioned this earlier, the instruction that Svetaketu received in the 8th Brahmanam, 8th Khanda, it's called 8th Khanda of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Khandam 8. It says, Saya Esha Anima Aidadatmyam Idam Sarvam Tar Satyam Sa Atma Tattvamasi Svetaketu Bhuya Eva Ma Bhagavan Vijñapayadu Idi Tatha Somya Idi Hovacha. Yaha Saha Esha Anima, that subtle spiritual truth, the Atman. It is actually the essence, the Atman of everything. Now remember, Tar Satyam, that's only eternal truth. And not only that, Tattvamasi, that eternal truth is you yourself. It is the statement. So remember, maybe intellectually it may be a bit entertaining if I refer to this. According to Advaita tradition or Madhva tradition, it is not Tattvamasi, it is Atattvamasi, because you find Sa Atma Tattvamasi. So Atma, actually, according to Vedic, this long, the Akara can be lengthened. So in Madhva tradition, Sa Atma Atattvamasi Svetaketu, that supreme truth is not you. That's an important thing. Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta tells you that the supreme truth that you are inquiring into, that you are seeking to discover, realize, is you yourself. Sa Atma Tat Tum Asi. Now, Atma here, grammatically, there is a scope for extending that long vowel, Atma, and one part of the long vowel can be attached to Tattvamasi, so become Atattvamasi. Atat becomes the opposite of Tat. So in Sanskrit, when you add A before a consonant, it makes the meaning opposite. When you add an before a vowel, it also makes the meaning opposite. Anishtam means anishtam. Ishtam means liking. Anishtam means the opposite of liking. So, and if before a consonant you add a, so atattvamasi. Satyam, asatyam. Satyam is truth, asatyam means falsehood. So, in the Advaita tradition, and in Advaita tradition which draws a line of demarcation between everything in this world, and between world and Ishvara, and between Ishvara and this phenomenal world. So, 5 possible differentiations called Pancha Bheda Siddhanta, doctrine of 5 distinctions or differences. There is a permanent, eternal distinction, difference between all jivas among themselves and all objects in this world among themselves, and also between Ishvara and Jiva, and Ishvara and Jagat, So if you draw a triangle, you can conceive of these 5 possible differences. Panchabheda Siddhanta. It is a kind of all-exclusivism. This is all-inclusivism. What Shankaracharya says is Tattwamasi. That supreme truth that you are looking for is you yourself. But again, the idea is further explained. So actually, in a way, if from a superficial point of view, you cannot accept this. How can you say the God whom you are meditating is you yourself? It makes no sense from a superficial point of view. So that's why Vedantins emphasize the point that you should never take it in the literal sense. You should take it only in the implied sense. Vachyartham means literary meaning. Should be discarded, and Lakshyartham, the implication, the implied meaning should be accepted. It makes sense in a spiritual way, only in a spiritual sense, only when you take the implication and not a literal meaning. But literally, no one can say you are meditating God, that is you yourself. It makes no sense, because all human beings who take food, who go to Kaiser for treatment, who travel by car, you cannot say they are God or anything. Absolutely make no sense. But the point is, within this psychophysical mechanism, this body-mind complex, there is one supreme divine principle, and that is distinct and different from this body-mind complex. This body-mind complex is only a vehicle, an instrument for it to manifest. But that divine principle is immanent, present in everything, omnipresent, present everywhere, and it is an all-transcending reality. In that sense, Tattwamasi is a statement of supreme truth. Svetaketu himself needed 8 more repetitions of the same statement. Svetaketu was a very brilliant man who studied all the 4 Vedas. 12 years he studied. The story goes like this. Uddalaka was himself a great Vedic teacher. So he had traveled all over India, North India, especially northwestern part of India. In those days, you have to remember Afghanistan, today's Pakistan, all this a part of Indian, that Vedic homeland. So Uddalaka had gone to some distant land to teach Vedas, maybe to participate in some kind of debate with other scholars. And he returned home one day, and before going, he had already made arrangements for his son, Svetaketu, to be instructed by another great teacher. So Svetaketu had gone to another Vedic school. Normally, Greek scholars will make it a point to send their own children to some of their friends. They may teach them, but sometimes they will send them to other great scholars. This is an ancient tradition, honoring other great teachers. So Svetaketu had gone to some other Vedic school. He had returned after 12 years of Vedic studies. This young man returned, and when he returned, he was not a very humble person. You can find Uddalako Karuni Svetaketum Putram Uvaja Swapnantam me Some Vijanihi Etraidat Purushasabidi, etc. It comes in the Khanda 8. So actually, Uddalaka tried to teach Svetaketu many things, but at the very beginning itself, the story goes like this. When Svetaketu returned, the father found him to be very arrogant. Uddalaka Karuni Svetaketum Putram Uvaja, etc. It begins like this, and then he says, and then when Uddalaka tried to test whether Svetaketu had already studied what was to be studied, he already heard what was to be heard, he already known that supreme truth, by knowing which everything becomes known. This is the beginning of this particular section. So, in fact, it begins like this. Yada somya ekena naka nigruntanena sarvam kashnayatam vijnatam syad, etc. Vajarambhanam vikaro namadhyam, etc. Did you learn that by which everything becomes known? Like, for example, when you come to know of the texture of the nature of iron by knowing a small tiny tool made of iron. Yada saumi lokamanina sarvam lokamayam vijnatam syad. Suppose you come to know a golden ring, and by knowing a golden ring, you know all about gold. It's enough. You don't have to know all about every piece of gold in this world to know the structure, the nature of gold. You may get a tiny piece of gold, maybe a earring or something, you can understand the nature of gold. Did you get that supreme knowledge by knowing which everything becomes known? The supreme spiritual knowledge. And Svetaketu said, no, I did not know that. The point is, Svetaketu was found to be very arrogant. Saha dvadasha varshupetya chaturvimshadi varshaka sarvan vedan aditya mahamana anuchamani stabdha yaya tamha pidavacha. We know what it means. Svetaketu had gone to a distant Vedic hermitage, and dvadasha varsha upetya, he studied for 12 years. Chaturvimshadi varshaka. Finally, when he was 24 years old, he returned. And the father asked the son, you look very arrogant and haughty. Education should make you humble. Education should give you a sense of self-restraint. But you become unnecessarily haughty and proud. What's the matter with you? Did you learn that by knowing which everything that is unknown becomes known? That's the purpose of education. So, and Svetaketu, I haven't even heard of such a thing. Svetaketu went to the extent of insulting his teachers. Maybe my teacher did not know. That's why they didn't teach me. In fact, Svetaketu was actually putting the whole blame on his teacher. At the beginning of Chandogya Upanishad, you find Chandogya Upanishad, 6th chapter, Khandam 1, that you find. Svetaketu is sent to a Vedic hermitage far away from his home. And after many years, his father returns home, himself teaching elsewhere. And he found Svetaketu had already become a grown-up young man, but education had not made him humble. Instead, education had made him haughty. So, what's the matter with you? Mahamana means a man who has got a very high opinion about himself. That's the result of education. It's not proper. So, did you really learn that supreme truth by learning which everything becomes known? So, Svetaketu said, I never even heard of such a thing. Then this is how the dialogue begins, the 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad, a very famous dialogue. And finally, that Svetaketu becomes a supreme knower of Brahman at the end of the 16th Khandam, because the 6th chapter has got 16 sections called Khandas. But Svetaketu himself required 8 repetitions, supported by 8 different examples. Metaphors, illustrations. Then only Svetaketu understood. So he himself took a long time to travel the distance from instruction to experience, from Tattvamasi to Aham Brahmasmi. So it all depends upon the amount of seriousness, a sense of sanctity and sacredness with which we approach spiritual literature. Thank you. Now we have interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Swamiji, you referred to the 4 Mahavakyas being associated with the 4 mutts of Shankara.
Yeah.
Where does the Kanchi Mutt fit into this structure? When I visited the Kanchi Mutt, I saw there a big board where they trace their lineage directly to Adi Shankara, an unbroken lineage right from there. So is there any Mahavakya associated with them?
Kanchi Mutt certainly must have had some association with Shankaracharya. But Shankara Digvijayas, the well-known biographies of Shankaracharya written in Sanskrit, there are quite a few. They don't mention Kanchi Mutt as founded by Shankaracharya as one of the four mutts. But there is no doubt that Kanchi Mutt has had a very intimate association with Shankara Parambara. And again, a lot of debate is going on, but there is no doubt that Kanchi Mutt played a very important role in preserving the Shankara tradition in the south. There is no doubt about it. Actually, that's a subject that's being debated among scholars still. Absolutely, there is no doubt, because Kanchi was a very important center of Vedic tradition during Shankaracharya's time, and it's mentioned in the histories of Pallavas, especially Pallavas and Cholas, very, very important. And it produced many outstanding scholarly monks also. But this is a subject that is being still discussed by scholars, So the preceptors of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, very well-known book brought out by Kanchi Mutt, the preceptors of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. One of the most authentic, one of the most well-written books on this subject. You can refer to that. It gives a long lineage of Parambara. But for some reason which we do not know, Vidyaranya's Shankara Digvijayam, Vidyaranya was closely associated with the Sringeri tradition, this Vivarana Prasthana. So this Kanchi is not mentioned, but Kanchi is one of the most ancient holy tirthas, the pilgrim centers of India. So certainly Shankaracharya. Not only that, there is a long tradition that Saundarya Lahari was written in Kanchi. Shankaracharya went visiting temples one after another, and when he stood in the presence of Divine Mother Kamakshi in Kanchi, he recited, and his disciple wrote down. That's the story goes. So most of the most magnificent poetical works, very classic, Saundarya Lahari. So this is all we can say. The subject is still being debated, Okay, right. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Pranam Maharaj, so you were talking about experience.
Yeah.
So is there any description of Shankara's own experience to enlightenment?
Yeah.
Like, how he meditated and how his mind went up and down, or, how he got the experience. Is there any book or any description of that account?
Some Shankara Digvijay. It is the books, Sanskrit books written in poetry on Shankaracharya's biography, called Shankara Digvijayas. So in some Shankara Digvijayas, like Govindiya Shankara Digvijayas, there is a reference to Shankaracharya getting immediate enlightenment when the Mahavakyas was formally instructed to him by Govinda Bhagavapada in Omkareshwar. That Govinda Bhagavapada's place is near today's Omkareshwar in Madhya Pradesh, where he met his guru. The tradition is that the river Narmada was in high floods at that time, high tides, and people were running away. The villages were being deserted, and for the paddy fields, all these grain fields were being destroyed and flooded. At that time, Shankaracharya happens to come, the tiny boy with a small kamantalu, and he observes the entire surplus water in his kamantalu by his mantra, and that helped that saved the lives of many people. So they all ran into Govinda Bhagavapada's that guha we call cave. That cave is still found in Omkareshwar. You can go there. The government is building a huge structure to commemorate that event near Omkareshwar. That cave is still there. these are all, and the description of those places given in Shankara Digvijaya is all clearly be seen. You can see them there. So, but we don't know about this miracle, because when you talk about miracles, that's a different area. So, but the point is, there is a description that Shankaracharya had this highest experience when he got this instruction from Govinda Bhagapada. Another important reference to this is, Shankaracharya had already this experience even before he undertook his journey as a boy of 6 years in search of his guru from his birthplace, when he studied. In fact, at that point only he formally took sannyasa. Without becoming a disciple, he took Garuva clothes. It's called Sankalpa Sannyasa. It is allowed, and at that time himself he had this experience. That's another version. You know, the stories of, the histories, the life stories of these great teachers can only be ascertained by reading these Sanskrit classics, which are biographies of these spiritual persons. Yeah.
So like in Ramakrishna's life, we can see how he did all his devotional practices. So nothing is available like that for Shankara. Is that so?
You see, actually, even those who lived in 16th century, 15th century, we have no proof. We have no proof of the lifestyle of Madhusudana Saraswati. Of course, I'm not comparing, or any great spiritual teachers who lived in 18th century. Up to, maybe up to 19th century, you don't find a single of these great spiritual teachers of India whose life stories are being properly recorded. I think, historically speaking, the first totally reliable, in a scientific sense, totally reliable historiography appears in India only in 19th century. Often we assume and we get confirmations about certain incidents through what we call historical concordance, the mechanism used by great historians. Suppose you hear something related to the Magadha Empire, Chandragupta, in 3rd century BC, we don't have a recorded history. But then you go to Megasthenes, a Greek traveler who came to India, was an ambassador, Seleucus ambassador in Magadha Empire, and here recordings in ancient Greece. So we come to corroborate, then we come to a conclusion. Like that, Shankaracharya's lifestyle, you don't find any such events. We don't find any such corroborative records by travelers and others till about 19th century. Yeah, absolutely don't know. Many of the saints who lived in 18th century, we don't know. Very little we know. Jnaneshwar, who lived much earlier, we don't know. So that's an important thing to remember. In India, historiography was not very well advanced or not much developed. The only possible that an approximate to historiography that happened in India was Kalhana Raja Tarangini. That is a description of the kings of Kashmir. Otherwise, history proper was never a concern of Indian scholars. Understand? That's the thing. But in Shankaracharya commentaries, there are clear references to his own experience, which he writes in his own words. Through these commentaries, you find. Yeah. Through Brihadaranyaka.
So is there any story about his previous lives which Shankara kind of, like Buddha, is there anything like that for Shankara?
Actually, the previous life stories that you find only in Buddha's case. Because in Buddhism, reincarnation is a central theme. Buddhism, it gives a lot of importance to reincarnation and doctrine of karma. Praditya Samutpada is one of the central themes of Buddhism, these life cycles, dependent origination. Reincarnation is accepted not only in Buddhism, much more so in Hinduism, in Sikhism, Jainism, everywhere. But it's not as central to Hinduism as it is to Buddhism. That's the only difference.
Hello, Swami. I had a question it's the what you said tonight about how remarkable both Shankara and his immediate disciples were in establishing the mats and writing their own, momentous works. We see that primarily where they had numerous great disciples in like Sri Ramakrishna or Jesus Christ, really in the incarnations. It seems unusual that to happen. Was Shankara an incarnation?
Shankaracharya is considered to be an incarnation of Shiva by Shankarites. He is considered to be an incarnation of Shiva by Shankarites. There are, of course, and they also quote some statements from this Rudra Prasnam, Shiva Puranam, and so there are statements there. In Kali Yuga I will be born as that shaven head. I will be born as a shaven head monk. Shiva telling Parvati. Such statements are found in the Shiva Puranas. Again, this incarnation idea, that if you go to India, you will be surprised. There are so many incarnations. It's a very complex subject. You have to think of 1.4 billion people living in a country which is less than 1/3 of America, and geographically speaking, and living as a combat civilization for the last 6,000 years. So, so if you go to India, Delhi or Bombay, see the streets, you get an idea of the traffic in Indian cities, Indian roads. You can get a taste of that. So, as I mentioned earlier, in the same family you find people, father going to Shiva temple, mother going to Vishnu temple, and the mother may not have a very high opinion about Shiva, not as high opinion as Vishnu, but doesn't go beyond the limit, So there is this idea of different incarnations. But Shankaracharya is considered to be an incarnation of Shiva among the Shankarite circles. That is true. If we go to some other organizations, for example, the ISKCON, they may think Krishna is only, in fact, others are Krishna's incarnation, they would say. So you can find, it doesn't make it doesn't create any problem in India, because it's only an ideological, philosophical, theological debate. Nothing like the Martin Luther hanging 90 theses in the doors of the cathedrals, and that kind of, that never happened. Just more like, the same family you find, one fellow, maybe the father may be a communist. There are examples in India. The communist chief minister who condemns temples and gods and goddesses and religions will accompany his wife. When the wife is going to temple, he will stay nearby, but the wife goes to the temple and he patiently waits, and he will help her arrange it. There is no conflict. It's common in India. That's a very jovial. They don't bother much about that.
What is the story? I think it's called Shankara Digvijaya, or there's a biography of Shankara. Is that what it's called? Is that considered just a mythology?
No, you can find little bit of mythology in it. That's true. You're right. Sometimes you find there is history bordering on mythology, but very often historical facts, because there can be very clearly corroborated. For example, scholars who visited India in the 9th century onwards, you can find in their writings references to the great teacher who traveled all over India, who founded monasteries, monastic orders, so on. We find those who visited India in 8th century, especially those who came. There was one Italian, Marco Polo, who was a famous historian, Ibn Battuta. not so much among Arab travelers, because they were not much concerned about higher philosophy or spirituality, but European travelers. One of the most well-known one was Marco Polo, and then from, of course, that's much later, from 16th century onwards, Portuguese travelers came. Some of them were students of religion also, so you can find.
Maharaj, the issue that came up in the Christian world of having different seats of knowledge, the Vatican in Rome, and of course Istanbul, and disputes about, I think, another place, was it Lyon, some other place where there was another pope. Shankara seems to have gone the distance to make sure that the seats of knowledge were distributed. It's not only consistent with philosophy, and not only was it a heroic effort at that time to do it, but it also strategically bore fruit because it avoided those other types of conflicts. Is that correct?
That's true. That's true. Mr. Gobinath was mentioning to Kanchi. So Kanchi is located in present-day Tamil Nadu. Now you find it was an ancient city which was a center of learning for centuries, which had trade relationship with some of the cities in China, because the East Bengal. It had like some of the cities in China's east coast. So it's a very ancient city, even during the Pallavas time, even before. So those places, and then Benares, and of course these great feats, and also many monasteries in the Himalayas, in the western side of Himalaya, Rishikesh, Haridwar, all these places. So in those places you still find great seats of learning, and also this habit of debate, learned debates. Not only Shankaracharya's commentaries, in much more ancient books like Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that's a book on debates, long debates taking place in the presence of great kings and emperors, among scholars who came from different parts of Indian subcontinent, happening sometime in the 5th millennium BC in what is now Bihar. It's called Mithila. Mithila is part of today's Bihar, and Janaka was a great philosopher king, and also very cutthroat discussion. You can see the Yajnavalkya Gargi Samvada in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you find. So that gives us a picture of a great intellectual tradition. Very interesting.
Do we know whether or not Shankara had any type of structure to help establish the structure? In other words, did he travel with a retinue? Do the stories suggest that his followers helped him accomplish this, or is he more? Is it more depicted as a solo effort?
Yeah, he used to be followed by 4 disciples. That is Padmapada, Sureshwara, Astamalaka, and Todakacharya. I cannot do better than referring to a great movie in Sanskrit, which is considered to be a masterpiece in filmography. The Shankaracharya movie in Sanskrit. So that gives you an idea of. They did so much of research to recreate, as far as it is possible in modern times, the situation, the socio-cultural situations in which Shankaracharya moved and traveled. It is as close as you can get to the original in filmography. Not much is possible, but still, if anyone wants to get an idea, it's almost 3 hours long movie. It was shown in Berkeley. Swami Vedananda went and saw it in Berkeley University, maybe in the 80s, I believe, I don't know. So she went along with Swami Prabodhanandaji. So
it's currently readily available on YouTube.
Yeah, maybe.
It's on YouTube currently. Yeah.
I gave this example because the Mahavakyas, 4 statements, each of the statement under the custodianship of a great monastery, each of the Vedas, and he installed one of his disciples there. And so that's the lineage.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So thank you for the wonderful questions. We will continue. The Mahavakya is a very important subject in Vedanta, very important subject. How the entire Vedic corpus, its philosophical and spiritual implications can be condensed into 4 very, very simple statements which literally won't make any sense. But if you go deeper into the interpretation, it condenses the entire Vedic wisdom in capsule form. Okay, thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.